Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Meet the Expert series, edition number 3, which is part of the TIE Delhi-NCR Startup School. Just to refresh everyone's memory, in the previous 2 months, we had 2 sessions, again with great speakers. Our first session was how to create great new products and world-beating companies. That was from Ashmeet Sedana of Engineering Capital Palo Alto. The second session after the next month was how to avoid the biggest mistakes that first-time founders make. That was by Rajesh Razdan. So as you can make out, our expert series is about how to. It's useful learning that everyone takes away. In the same vein, it's a pleasure for me to welcome Harini Sivakumar, founder and CEO of Building Earth Rhythm, to today's session of Meet the Expert series. And she's going to talk about how to plan an MVP. By way of a brief introduction, Building Earth Rhythm is one of the fastest growing D2C skincare brands. It's got brands in the beauty and skincare space. Harini has, when I got to meet her recently, it was delightful to learn about her background and how she started the business. She was a banker who quit her job to take care of her elder son. 7 years down the line, she started her business in 2015 from her kitchen. And that was fantastic for me to learn how she started from her kitchen. She started because she saw a skincare problem at home, and then she developed a DIY solution that became a brand and a company. The other fascinating thing is we normally hear about co-founders who are classmates or friends or whatever. In this case, her co-founder is her very own dad, actually. That to me was very, very fascinating. And finally, the timing for the session is perfect because just while Building Earth Rhythm raised their last big funding round of $8 million from NICA and Anicut Capital just last month in May. So congratulations, Harini, and welcome to the session. Over to you, and the stage is entirely yours now.
Thank you, Mr. Shrikant, for such a warm welcome. I'm extremely delighted to be here today, sharing my experiences. I've come a long way, right? Before I jump into the main topic, a little about, elaborating, what you actually mentioned, right? For me, I think I'm an entrepreneur by chance. I call myself the accidental entrepreneur because neither did I dream nor did I aspire that one day I'm going to be an entrepreneur or anything. I was just trying to figure out solutions. And I did see that many people out there were having similar such problems. And when you start sharing your problems and you start finding solutions and sharing those solutions, and it just became an idea of its own, right? So I decided to build that idea, and that's how the entire concept of Earth Rhythm came in. And I'm so happy today to be talking about minimum viable product, simply because there cannot be a better example than Earth Rhythm in itself to explain how we started off, what kind of testing did we do in the market before we finally launched a brand called Earth Rhythm in 2019, right? So back in the day, 2015, when I was still a homegrown entrepreneur, when I was trying to make kitchen stuff, honestly, I was not aspiring to be an entrepreneur, but trying to find solutions, I said. And then when I started sharing it with my friends and family, and when they started coming back to me saying that, hey, Harini, this time you need to charge us money because we're coming back to you to get the same product again. And that's when, I still remember those days of sitting down with my dad and actually calculating the COGS, cost of goods, as to how do I arrive at, charging anyone, for the product that I make for them. So it started off from that level, improvising. And then there came a point in my life where we were like, we need to get out of this home-based setup. We cannot manage anything in this house anymore. And that's when the big step of stepping out of my comfort zone, leaving my kids behind, going out and starting a brand, happened in 2019. Okay, coming to today's agenda, I will be covering, MVP is a huge, vast subject, to be very honest. And I'm going to, simply, pick up the most important things that, somebody who's actually an entrepreneur or is looking forward to building or launching a brand in the market or a product in the market, most important things which they need to look out for is what I will be talking about today. Precisely, we'll be covering, pretty much what is an MVP, why should we build it, difference between a prototype versus an MVP, and then certain essential things to, keep in mind in terms of, how do you set up a minimum viable product, and then we'll go about to talking about timeline and budget. So this will be the flow of today's conversation.
If I may interrupt you for just one second for the audience. I should have mentioned this earlier. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions for Harini once she finishes. So I'm going to request you to put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box, and we'll ensure that there's enough time to cover as many questions as possible. Sorry for the interruption, Harini, back to you.
No worries. Thank you so much. So MVP, a minimum viable product, right? Before we even jump into what is an MVP, I need to make a disclaimer here. Although the name says product, MVP is not a product in itself, right? It's a process. It's a process where, you actually repeat it over and over again to finally get to that final end product that you have been visualizing, right? So in a way, MVP is nothing but simply a process, a development technique, which is introduced into the market with basic features, right? Where consumers can actually experience and use and probably solve the problem which they're actually having. And an MVP should actually, be only to a level of only getting an attention from consumers. It should actually not have all the features. Then, there's no difference between an MVP and a final product at all. It should have scope for improvement, because ultimately what you want to do through an MVP is gather more and more feedback, reviews, and work on it and keep making it better. So in short, it's just a miniature version of your final dream or your goal or the product that you're trying to build, right? When you keep repeating this process, right, when you're trying to launch an MVP into market, and when you're constantly experimenting in the when you're constantly experimenting on your MVP, there are a lot of assumptions that you do. You have a lot of assumptions, because when you're trying to build a product, you kind of, you want to know how your product should work, what kind of marketing strategy to use, what architecture will work for, this particular product or a service that you're launching, what kind of monetization strategy will you use. This is very important, right? In today's era where, D2C is like booming, the first thing that you will really need to figure out when you're launching a product or a service is it going to be an online strategy, an offline strategy, or is it going to be omni-channel? What kind of monetization strategy are you going to use? And what kind of laws and regulation you have to comply with. Now, this is a very, very critical point. A lot of times, a lot of people don't emphasize on the compliances part. And I think that's extremely critical during the MVP stage itself, to evaluate your laws and regulations that, the product or the service that you're launching, and where will it fall in. Because ultimately, if you do that in the last stage, when you're, almost ready with your final product, you will be paying hefty charges if you're not actually complying with the rules and regulations. So it's always good to ensure that, in line, you're complying with the regulations while you are in the MVP process itself, right? And no matter how much you are good at all your assumptions, you've covered all the areas, believe me, there will always be 10 or 15 assumptions where you've not actually succeeded, or probably it remains as a problem in itself. But that's okay, right? The whole idea of doing an MVP is that only. We don't want it to be 100% successful. We want to know what worked and what did not work. And hence, when you're actually launching the final product into the market, that these are the things that worked for me, and this is the strategy I will be using, and you will be slow on the ones that didn't work for you. So hence, don't really shy away from, your assumptions. Make as many assumptions as possible when you're building your MVP. Some will work, some won't, but at the end, this, it's a huge learning experience. Over here, I think there's one good example that I can think of is Facebook, right? I think if you remember, during my era, there was something called Orkut, if you remember. So, Orkut was the one that came first with the concept of scrapbooking, right? Writing on someone's wall. Honestly, it was a new concept altogether, right? We didn't know what wall meant. People said, go and write on my wall on Orkut. We were like wondering what wall, what wall are they even talking about? It's something like where you can go and write anything and everything on somebody's page, and it's open and public and anybody can read it, right? And then for some reason Orkut shut down because it had very, very basic features, and then Facebook came into the pictures. Now when Facebook came in, it had just extremely basic features of just connecting two people in, wherever they might be in different parts of the world. Connecting two people was the simple idea of Facebook, right? Now today, if you look at, after so many years, if you think about what Facebook is doing, it's phenomenal, right? I mean, there are businesses that survive on Facebook today, right? It's become huge. And how did this happen? It didn't happen overnight, right? Initially they built a very, very minimum featured, kind of a platform, and they kept working on feedback, getting consumers to talk about the feel, the experience, and build in features, and finally it is here today. So that's a classic example of how, I think Facebook is a brilliant example. And in this process, if you actually think and see, how many of us even remember what the first when it launched, what kind of a platform Facebook was? None of us even remember. All we know is today we have a platform which is loaded with features, and we're happy with it. So MVP is a kind of a, and that's extremely important to understand, that you don't pump in too much money into your MVP. You keep it really minimum, because ultimately that's something which is going to keep on changing. It's a process, it's an evolution process, and hence you don't want to spend too much money into your MVP. Now, while talking about MVP, another most important thing that we need to keep in mind is prototype versus MVP. Now, this comes up very often. A lot of people have asked me, is prototype and MVP the same? Absolutely not. Now, prototype is, ultimately prototype and MVP are early versions of your product. Both of them are similar in terms of description. However, a prototype is what, when you give a form to your idea which is there in your mind, right? Now, this form need not necessarily solve a problem. It's just a physical representation, or simply a sketch representation of your idea that you're trying to launch. Now, that's a prototype. Now, whom will a prototype benefit? Predominantly the company or the founder themselves, if they're trying to design a product or if they're trying to build a product. The internal design team, the engineering team, they will benefit out of a prototype, not the consumers, right? Now, while building an MVP, the whole goal of an MVP is to ensure that you're solving a problem and you're giving consumers the ability to use that product and give you a feedback, and that's not possible in a prototype. So that's the clear distinction between an MVP and a prototype. So in an MVP, you are able to give, for example, another classic example is, say someone wants to travel from point A to point B. In an MVP, you would probably first give them a skateboard. They'll be wobbly in a skateboard and they'll try to reach there. And then the consumer comes back and says, hey, I was able to travel, but I was wobbly. I fell twice while I was traveling. And then you give them a cycle. They say that I went, but I was too slow. And then you improvise it and you put a motor on it and you give them a motorbike. They say I went fast, but I got wet. And then you come back and you put a roof on top of it and you make a car, and they go and they say, hey, I need luxury right now. So you build an AC into it, you build music system, entertainment into it, right? So that's exactly how you look at MVP, right? So you are able to give something where you're able to keep on adding value to it and ultimately hit at the end goal. There are some certain ways in which how you can actually set up an MVP. There are, at least this was, something that I followed at Earth Rhythm, which I think is extremely critical, especially if you are someone who is in the D2C space, trying to build a product or trying to build a brand. The process that I'm going to mention right now will be extremely helpful, right? To set up an effective MVP, you start about actually figuring out a problem statement, right? You would be, honestly, the fact that you're coming out and starting a business in itself means that you are actually coming out, helping consumers solve some problem that they have. And probably the next step would be, once you know what the problem statement is, you would want to understand who your customers would be, where are they from, and then you analyze the market size, the competitors, and then you go on to validating the problem and the product, right? So that's how you actually go about setting up a MVP. Now, framing the problem, which is the most important step, and the first step, is extremely critical, because most times this becomes the corporate language. Your team, your investors, your stakeholders, everybody is instantly going to relate with your product or your company or your brand itself, right? Now, at Earth Rhythm, for us, it's all about sustainability, right? We talk about sustainability in everything that we do. We want to bring a sustainability element around it, right? Whether it's the packaging, whether it's the product, or whether it's anything that we do, we talk about sustainability. Now, hence, what are we trying to solve here? We're trying to solve a bigger problem in the environment of, probably reducing the carbon footprint of every consumer out there, right? So now, even when I build a pitch deck, or when I go to an investor, that's going to be the first thing that I talk about, right? What am I doing here? What problem am I solving in the environment? And that is extremely critical for you to evaluate what is your problem solving point over here. And once you know that, you will need to figure out how big is this market that is looking for, that is having this problem. And if your answer is going to be very small, or if it's very niche, or if it's going to be 1 to 5%, you're losing out a lot, right? The problem that you're solving should actually have a large amount of audience, and only then you will be able to scale up your business, which is extremely important. And if you come and say that there's only a small amount of community who have this problem, obviously you will not be able to go past that, right? So evaluating what is the size of this problem, what percentage of this market actually have this problem, and will I be able to reach out to them effectively, and will they take this the solution from me or not, is something that you will have to evaluate. The second thing is identifying your users, your target audience, your consumers, right? Now, for this, today, I think, while you are implementing MVP, you have a bunch of free tools, right? From Google Analytics. And there are so many other tools where you can actually start identifying who are your consumers, where are they even coming from, are they tier 1 city, are they tier 2 city, are they tier 3 city, are these men, are these women? So you start figuring out who these consumers are they in a certain age group. So once you start identifying who your consumers are, you go on to understand your users. Now, this is again a very, very, very important step, because you start interacting with this target audience whom you have identified, and you want to understand, is there a problem that I am talking about? Do you see this as a problem as well? And if the answer is yes from their side, you start giving them, you start working with them, and start doing a lot of what do you say, those research around them, trying to giving them a lot of these Google Sheets. I remember in the initial days, the number of Google Sheets that we sent out to our customers, asking them, do you want fragrance in your product? Do you want plastic in your product? So this helps you understand whether, they are wanting what you are looking for or not, right? So you're trying to solve a problem. Is that what they're looking for is something you need to fill the gap and see if you're able to, understand their mindset. That's extremely critical. And the next is, once you speak to your customer and you understand, yes, they have a similar problem, you validate the problem with them, right? So you tell them that this is the solution that you have out there. It could be a very, very small size, but still, once you give them the problem, you will be able to understand whether they are willing to buy the the solution or not from you, right? You typically, you start understanding, once you start talking to your consumers, you get certain answers very clearly in your mind, right? Do users know any potential solutions to the problem already? Is there any significant problem that they're facing at all, right, in that area at all? Are there any workarounds that they have been using? If not, the problem that you are trying to solve, there should be some workaround that they're already doing for that particular problem, right? What is that workaround? So these are some very good insights that you will get by conversing with your, with the exact target audience. And the last and the most important thing is this consumer willing to pay for that particular problem that you're trying to solve? Now, that's very important, because unless they find value in what you are doing, they will not be willing to pay at all, right? So that's extremely critical to find out if they're willing to pay and how much are they willing to pay for such a service or a product at all. Once you know this, and the last step is very easy. Once you know what, you've validated the problem, is you probably ideate on a potential solution. And obviously, and if all these steps are in place, it's always a happy ending, right? So that the product is going to go into the market and you are actually getting there. So Earth Rhythm in itself is again a good example. And the reason why I put it in the same order is, if you look at my journey, when I came into the market in 2019, the first product that we launched was a shampoo bar, right? We came out telling everyone that shampoo bars, now, typically shampoos is an essential product. It's no longer a luxury or anything. Just like your toothpaste, you need a shampoo in your bathroom, and you use it every single week. So we told the consumers that we are replacing this plastic bottle into a bar form. And we gave and we promised the consumers that they will see no transition while moving from a bottle to shampoo to a bar format. Initially, they were inquisitive. And when we told them, if it really worked like your regular shampoo, whatever you might be using, Dove, L'Oreal, Tresemme, whatever you're using, if it's able to, imitate exactly the same way, would you be willing to pay for this product and move into a sustainable lifestyle? This was the kind of, the thought process that we planted into consumers' mind. Now, all of them came back and said, hey, yes, if it will work exactly like my shampoo, why not? I want to buy it, right? Now, while we launched the product into the market, we launched it as a 100 grams bar, right? And interestingly, while we were raising our seed round funding, there was this, lot of number crunching that we were doing. And, one of the analysts asked us from the investment community, why is it that, you say that shampoo bars are one of your, the most sought after product on your website, you sell them in huge volumes, but the repeat rate for your shampoo bar is really slow, right? So the repeat rate was almost after the first purchase, the second purchase would be at the 4th month or the 5th month. So we were also quite shocked, actually, right? So we started trying to understand why consumers are spending so much time to come back and repurchase this product. There could ideally be only 2-3 reasons, right? One, they don't like the product and hence they're not coming back quickly. Number two, they're probably not excited about the product. What is it? And while we actually started researching on this, we figured out that our bar shampoo, which was 100 grams, was actually lasting a consumer for 6 months. And obviously they were purchasing again. The second bar was purchased only on the 5th month or maximum on the 6th month, right? Which is a huge learning process for us. And hence we started cutting down. We started bringing 50 grams bar, 30 grams bar, because we wanted the consumers to finish the shampoo bar quickly and come back and buy one more again. Now, this also helped us cut down on the costing, right? If a 100-gram bar was selling at 500 rupees, we were able to sell it at 250 and 175 and so on, which means we are still able to give them a cost-effective solution. And at the same time, we are also having the benefit of them doing a repurchase quite quickly. So this is one example of how, we kept reinventing the wheel, keep working on the same product, improvising it on features, on the product, the ability to perform. A lot of times in the market, you would see many brands coming out saying now improvised formula, new formula, improvised formula, and all of that is nothing but a process of MVP in itself. There's no end to MVP, to be very honest, right? Even after your final product is launched into the market, you still have a scope for improvising it, and you keep getting feedback again and again. But as you scale up the brand, you keep a threshold, right? Now at Earth Rhythm, we have a threshold for many products. Say complaints, let's look at complaints as one. So if there are similar complaints for a packaging, if they say the pump is not working, so we keep a threshold of say 2%. If 2% of the consumers who have bought in the last 6 months who have come back with the same problem, then there is a problem that we need to look into it immediately, right? So we build thresholds based on how our MVP has worked for us, and these are very, very helpful in the long run, because when you operate in a huge scale, you can't really afford to have bigger mistakes, and hence these checks and balances are very, very helpful. Coming to timeline and budget, which is again a kind of a, I would say, timeline is very, very difficult to talk in terms of MVP, because for a mobile app, someone who's building a mobile app, for someone who's building a product, someone who's in a food industry, the timeline would completely differ, right? Now, according to me, I would say at Earth Rhythm, what we do is, for us, for an MVP, the timeline is always based on the end goal. So we know, for example, we're working on a new project that we're trying to launch a series of product that will be launched only in the US market, right? Now we back work. Now we know what is the end goal. We want to whom we want to target and what is the end goal. We want to build a certain line of products. It's going to be launched in the US market, and we have a timeline for it saying that by end of this year, by November, December, we want to go into the market. Now we back work it and we see, to get there, what should be the timeline. So if we start today, what is going to be my R&D time? What is going to be my, my MVP time, where I will be sampling this, where I'll be giving it into the market and getting feedback about the product. And hence we come to an ideation in terms of, it takes about 7 to 9 months for us to launch this product finally into the market, right? So that timeline is extremely critical, and you will be able to understand this when you clearly know what your end goal is, right? Budgeting for MVP, I think there are two ways when you budget for an MVP. Obviously, going to market quickly is essential for any product and everybody. And I think today's D2C, again, faster to market is the most catchy word, right? Everybody wants to go into the market as quickly as possible. But there are two ways, right? So one is, if you are bootstrapped, the budgeting is completely different for an MVP. And if you're a funded company, it's very different, right? So when you're bootstrapped, you end up doing everything all by yourself. You wear multiple hats, you want to cut corners, you want to ensure that you're actually doing everything, right? From graphic designing to building the product, to selling it, to marketing. Everything happens organically, right? Simple things like even marketing. In a bootstrap company, we rely so much on word of mouth, whereas if you are funded, obviously you have the luxury or the bandwidth to spend a little bit more and figure out where this traffic is coming from. You get some paid traffic as well, right? But there are plus and minuses to both. I would honestly say, when you are building an MVP, you should spend as little as possible, because like I said, usually MVP comes with bare minimum features, right? You don't really want it to have fancy features. You don't know what will work, what will not work. So you want to ensure that you're keeping it very, very simple and it's solving the problem. Say, for example, in my case, a shampoo, right? When we started our sustainable journey, consumers told us that, we thought glass was, more sustainable. Let's start using glass packaging because glass is better than plastic. And this was the thought process that we had. But when we started scaling up, we figured out that glass tends to break. And the amount of breakage that we saw, it was really disheartening. And we felt that actually we failed. We can't really scale up being sustainable. And probably this was the reason why huge brands never opted to be, plastic free. And then we started figuring out a solution, and when we started working on many things, we figured out there are other ways other than simply the packaging that actually can talk about sustainability to consumers, right? So that happens as a process. And when we launch it into the market and when we real time see the problems happening around us, we start finding solutions and keep bettering that product in itself, right? So I would say the best way would be, whether you're bootstrapped or funded, to spend very little money into your MVP. Where you could actually think of investing some money would be into tools, right? Analytics, which is extremely important. Data. So the data that you gather out of doing an MVP or launching an MVP into the market is extremely critical. Now, like I said, there are a bunch of tools that are available free in the market out there, right? From Google Analytics, you have tons and tons of tools. However, if you have the ability and bandwidth to spend a little bit more, and you've actually got some amount of funding and traction from investors, it's a good idea to actually spend time in actually evaluating all of these things, in terms of putting money into analytics, building process, so that in the long run, when you are actually gearing up to launch the final product into the market, the chances of it failing would be much, much lower. So, probably, these I've actually summed up pretty much, all what I wanted to say. I'm happy to taking some questions if there are any, Mr. Srikanth.
Sure. One request, please don't call me Mr. You make me feel older than I am. So let me start by asking you this. You started in your kitchen in 2015. You entered the market in 2019. At some point closer to 2019, you must have done your MVP. Now, I want to ask you, did you actually look ahead and say, hey, let's do an MVP? Or did you just use your common sense to say, we need to do ABCD to feel more comfortable and confident? And then one day someone came and told you, look, that's what you did is a jargon called MVP. And did you retrofit it?
What you said last is absolutely correct. I'm so glad you asked this question, because in my case, at least most of the founders, right? Obviously, we don't plan to fail, right? The whole concept was, for me, was I was solving a problem and I really didn't have money at that point of time. And obviously, the little money that I was actually pumping into the business had to be carefully utilized in terms of where it is going. How am I spending this money? So it organically happened in such a way that I was actually, initially I knew who my audience were. I was actually selling it only to them. And then it started moving word of mouth, sharing with friends, family, and then few more people asking me. And then I started exploring myself and going into doing small exhibitions, finding markets where I can try to sell. Instead of people coming to me, can I go and sell it to them, right? That's the next step. And to be very honest, at that time, I did not know what an MVP was, all these fancy jargons, nothing. But actually, when I sit down and when I see what are the steps to implement MVP, I've actually done all of this in the initial stages, right? So knowingly or unknowingly, MVP is just, a technical term, but this is how we actually build a product in itself, right? We want to know who our customers is, how are we going to sell, how, what kind of money am I going to pump into these marketing strategies? And I think that's how, Earth Rhythm was also built.
Right. So, Harini, couple of well-known people, Steve Jobs and Richard Branson, they've gone on record as saying that we don't rely on an MVP. And so are MVPs overrated, or just that these guys are superstars who don't need things that common people like us need?
So I think I won't say it is not needed for sure. There are two different type of people out there, right? So to be very honest, let's, in the Indian context, let's take Dhirubhai Ambani, right? Do you think he had an MVP in mind when he started Reliance? Nothing, right? He just happened, he knew there was a gap in the market and he knew he could fill something out there, and he built a company, right? There was no MVP, there was no business plan, there was no MIS when he started off, right? To be very honest, they all come from a different thought process. It worked for them. They believe in their gut feeling and they know who their customers are and they sell the product. But there are a bunch of other founders who prefer to learn from these founders' mistakes, learnings, entire process. And that's where MVP comes in, right? MVP was not something which was theoretically there in our MBA days where we learned it and then we were able to implement it. These are just learnings that is coming from these founders themselves. And I think it is important to, document these and put it out there, because while reading it and while understanding, they will know what are the steps and in what way it should be done.
Right. So I guess it's fair to say that if you have a lot of money to burn and if you have a lot of swag, then you can go and launch something without an MVP. But if you are like any other normal founder who's working with constraints, then you probably need to do an MVP.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Simple things like even tools, right? Like I said, when I started off, I think I'm stressing so much on analytics because for me, what worked was analytics, data mining, right? Data is so critical these days. And if you spend a lot of time on your data, you don't need to go anywhere. You have everything on your fingertips. These data will be able to tell you which are your star performers. In fact, today, in websites like Shopify, It's able to tell us that, people who ordered 100 people who ordered Murmuru shampoo bar, 85 people also ordered this XYZ product along with it. So that gives us an opportunity to think, okay, maybe I can bundle this up and give it to the consumer, right? So these kind of analytics are extremely critical. And I think that's what makes it important, why you should be spending more time on analytics.
So fortunately, we have so many of these tools that you described, which throw up a lot of data. But the question is, very often you end up with so much data that you don't know which one to. Some of them might seem interesting, but may not be the ones you focus on to say, look, let's latch on to that and take a significant decision. So what all should be measured? Because otherwise you'll get drowned in that ocean of data. And which aspects of data should you really look at during the MVP to take your critical decisions?
Yeah, first would be customer. You should know who are your, the target audience is extremely critical, right? Their age group, their gender, which city are they living in. So this is extremely important. And once you know this, there are two other things which is very, very important. One is average order value, AOV. Right now, you need to know what is the average order value that you're building for the product that you're selling in the market, simply because on a long run, you will be able to build your business plan using these. You will know that at what point you will be able to break even with this product, only when you will be able to measure these things, right? When you know what your AOV is, what is the LTV, right? Lifetime value of this customer who's coming into my store and buying this product. So right after customer, I think one should pay a lot of emphasis on AOV and LTV. And CAC won't come at this point, cost of acquisition, because cost of acquisition comes when you're actually spending money to acquire a customer, right? In the initial days, you're simply putting this product to a known person or a known community, and you're trying to get feedback. So there you will only want to see what is the value of this customer and what is the AOV I'm able to build out of this product. So I think after customer, it's AOV and LTV.
Customer, average order value, and lifetime value are the three things you would focus on. So I'm picking up one of the questions that Ankita from the audience has asked. She says you spoke about customers, but how do you get access to the target audience for an MVP? What audiences do you reach out to? How do you get access to them?
So today's scenario, so there are two ways to look at it, right? So if you are a digital brand, if you're trying to launch something digitally, the ideas are endless how you will reach out to your consumer, right? If you're reaching out to someone who is probably in the age group of 18 to 25, you have to go to a platform like Instagram, where your highest amount of audiences are sitting. Build a very engaging content out there. Today, content plays such an important role. As much time you've spent time and energy on building your product, if you don't have interesting content around it, unfortunately you fail in the market, right? Consumers attention span has come down from 15 seconds to 10 seconds to today 3 seconds, right? Hence you need to grab the attention of a consumer in just 3 seconds, and that content means so much, because in that 3 seconds you need to do so many things. You need to actually tell what your product is, what are you doing, what value are you bringing to the customer. So hence, being on the right channel at the right time is very important. So say, for example, another example I'll tell you. Another colleague, a friend of mine, who also runs a brand, his brand is called Neiman's. They're into sustainable shoes, right? Taran, if you look at his strategy for, the Neiman shoes, he spends a lot of money on LinkedIn. Why? Because his consumer base are the professionals who are sitting there, who are going to office, who are able to, think, who are these, very intellectual people. These are his target audience, right? Obviously, his number one channel will be LinkedIn, followed by Facebook. Whereas for a skincare brand, my number one channel would be Facebook. And I would never even look at LinkedIn as a channel, because I know somebody who's on LinkedIn will not want to buy a shampoo or a conditioner, right? So hence, you will know which platform to go when you actually know who your consumers are. And to know that, you need to know some basics, like what is their gender, what is their age group, and all of that. If in case you're going offline, you're just starting off offline, and you're trying to set up a restaurant or something, the best way would be to probably do a lot of sampling activities, right, in that particular locality and see whether it's building traction or not. Now we are going offline, right? Now we've opened 3 kiosks in different malls pan India, and the learning is tremendous, right? We see that Dehradun is such a potential place. There's so many people who are wanting skincare, whereas probably a place like Orissa is not really picking up at all, because we still need to spend so much time educating consumers over there. So you really need to define the place where you're going and spend some time and doing some recce and speaking to that community there, and then you set up, it becomes much easier for you to penetrate into that market.
So Harini, you raised a lot of money. You can do expensive stuff like setting up kiosks and malls. But I'm reading between the line for Ankita's question in terms of access to, you defined the channels well, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook.
Yeah.
But I think the other related question is, can I just use my own organic handle as a founder, or do I need to spend money to boost my a post or whatever? So how much money do you think needs to be spent for the smallest possible MVP actually, if you're bootstrapped?
See, when to be very honest, you don't need to spend anything. You can, like you said, when we started off, right, the reason why we even got a seed funding was till we went to the investor for a seed funding round, we didn't spend a rupee on marketing, a rupee, right? Not even boosting posts on Instagram.
Important message. Yeah.
We just didn't spend any money because we simply were doing organic activities on all social media channels, trying to be present, trying to relate with the consumers. Today, influencer marketing is such a huge thing. And, there's an influencer for lifestyle, there's an influencer for healthcare, there is an influencer for, beauty and makeup. So you try to reach out to you try to speak to your audience through these mediums. And you can do this, and there are several ways, right? Now, influencer marketing, you don't really need to spend money and going to an agency. You simply can do barter collaborations, right? Another interesting way is, in my initial days, we actually collaborated with a lot of similar brands for cross-selling products, right? I had a friend who was selling sustainable baby diapers. So we started doing cross-promotional activities on each other's handle. We started doing giveaways with them. So I am able to reach to her customers who are potentially interested in sustainability, and she's able to access my customer base who are also interested in sustainability, right? So things like these are extremely small but very powerful, because these are all very sustainable, and it will, in the long run, build it into a stronger base.
Great points, Harini. So I'm picking up questions from Yuvraj in the audience, and I think this related to what you said earlier. You said you work backwards. If I have to launch on day 0, I work backwards and say, when should I do my MVP? So Yuvraj's question is, what's the ideal time between an MVP and a launch? And what are your views on pricing during MVP? Do you experiment with pricing? Do you offer it free? What do you do?
Pricing is very sensitive. From my experience, I'm going to say, I don't know if this is right or wrong. In my experience, I think pricing is something that you should do in the day 1 itself. Even before you launch your MVP, you should really know what pricing you're targeting. And that is also a function of, knowing your customer, right? Whether they will be able to afford this product. And that's why I said, speaking to them and finding out whether they will be willing to pay for such a solution or not is extremely critical, because that will also define the price of your product, right? You cannot launch a product at X price, and then when you go into the market, finally, you can't tell them that I have reduced the price by, say, 100, 200 rupees. So that means you yourself, you're telling someone, the customer, that, I am actually, there's less value out of it. So I have come down on the price. That can never happen. That gives a very wrong signal. So pricing is something that has to be determined very carefully in the initial stages itself. And you cannot go back and tell the customer that I'm increasing or decreasing. Increasing is still a point. If you're actually launching with more features, you can still add on a little bit more and then launch it into the market, but you cannot go the reverse way, right? So that's one. And in terms of, the timeline, like I said, it's very personal. It's very, it's very dynamic, and it's different for every business type, right? If you look at a mobile app, it has to go through several amount of testing, and there's no end to testing process, right? It's a continuous process, and hence they will have to define it saying that 6 months is going to be my testing period. Now, in my case, for us, clinical trial is one way of, telling what will be the, MVP timeline for us, because clinical trials typically take us 3 to 6 months. And hence we know after the clinical trial process, we will be doing a sampling for another 2 months. So, 3 plus 2, 5 months goes away in that, and then an R&D for 3 months. And then we know, so typically to launch a product, we need about 10 to 12 months, right? So for us, it is very different. But to be very honest, in this context, I'm not able to comment on all the other industries because I have never dealt with them.
Right. So now I know you said you've not dealt with an industry, but I'm going to, there's a person, Chetan, who's asked a question, and I'm asking you to kind of wear a consulting hat and answer his question. He says, how can a B2B trading business plan on an MVP? What do you think the MVP should be if I'm a B2B trading business? I know it's a tough question I'm asking you because taking you away from your main zone, but hopefully you can give Chetan some pointers.
Yeah. So for B2B, right? So I'm going to take the idea of, India Mart. Yeah. Right, because I've used India Mart extensively in the initial days, right? I think the best part, in an for an MVP to be effectively done in a B2B platform would be to probably, your first step should be to connect the consumers, those two people who are actually trying to do business with each other, right? And then probably, the first point is getting them connected, and then figuring out how can you, probably keep them connected on the platform itself. That's a huge challenge for B2B. Now, we are someone who uses Alibaba in a huge level, right? Which is also a B2B platform. Now, it's a big success because the platform does not allow both the buyer and the seller to move out of the platform. The minute we move out of the platform, that's it. There ends the story. So your MVP should initially start about connecting these two people, and you should keep on working on improvising on keeping them grounded and staying on the platform itself. Now, how can you do this? One example that I can think of is, can you make the payment process within the platform itself? And you can give an surety to the buyer saying that if you're not happy with your purchase, we are actually here to help you find a resolution, right? So that way the buyer is not actually going out of the way paying the seller directly and is actually transacting through the platform itself. So you will keep building features on these, and that's how a B2B platform actually starts growing up. So like I said, the first step is to connect them and keep them connected in the platform would be the answer.
Great insight. Clearly, funding is top of mind for any startup founder. So one of the questions is, does an MVP help boost investor confidence to say, look, my risk is slightly reduced?
Yeah, it does. It does, because to be very honest, how much ever hard we try now, there are, if you're extremely lucky, you will find an investor like I got in the initial days who simply believed on my instinct. But most investors out there want a detailed plan, right? They want to mitigate as much risk as possible. And hence they will want to see how well you know the market you're operating in, right? Some certain very important things that they will look for is, how well does this girl knows? Like I'm not from the IIMs and the IITs, to be very honest, right? And hence their thought process was, how well does Harini know this market? How big is this market? What problem is she solving? Is she confident that she'll be able to crack this market, right? Now, these are very, very important things that they look for, right? The conviction that the founder brings to the table in terms of cracking this market. And you need to substantiate your confidence with numbers and with these kind of things, like say a deck or an MVP plan or a business plan. All of these will support what you are trying to probably present, but it's extremely important that you actually have these plan ready, because obviously they will finally want to see all of this.
Right. You had spoken about analytics tools, Google Analytics, etc. earlier, but Archana has a more specific question. She's saying, can you elaborate on which tools are the best practice for data analytics?
So we use something called Lifetimely, which is, if anybody is out there, they can actually Google and see, and there's something called even Conversific. These are two very good tools that are available out there. This is very beginner friendly. It's not very expensive. Somebody who's on an MVP stage can very, very well accommodate these costs in their MVP. Now, these are slightly advanced version of your Google Analytics. It goes more granular. It gives you more data, more understanding into, your P&L, right? So for example, when we started implementing Lifetimely, we started getting our daily P&Ls. Every day in the morning, 8 a.m., I get my daily P&L. So which means I know if I've just spent 20,000 rupees the previous day on, say, Google, Facebook, everywhere, what was the ROAS, which channel did we spend, how many customers did we acquire. So you get a clear cut view of everything on a daily basis. And these are extremely important because the next day, that, these were the things I should be probably not working on today, and I will change the strategy if it's not working.
Right. So one of the, while there's a startup boom happening all around us, and certainly in India and most parts of the world, one of the regrets is there aren't enough women-founded startups. But the good news is D2C is one area where many women have found it easy to start their business. And you're a great example yourself. While being a homemaker, looking after your other responsibilities, you could start on a part-time basis and then grow the business. What would your advice be to other women who are at home, who may have an idea, saying, how do you take the first step towards becoming an entrepreneur through the D2C route?
I think the first step would be that, when you have an idea, just give wings to it, right? Just start experimenting on it. And there's no end to, probably today, I think the avenues are so much. I think D2C is such a strong space that, with very limited tools, like, I was sitting in my kitchen and I was able to build a website and sell through my website, being registered under MSME, all this just sitting at home. Right? Today, you have the power of, logistics, which actually comes to your doorstep, picks up your package, delivers it to the customer within 24 hours, within 5 hours. Amazon is offering 1 hour delivery, right? So the features and the facilities available are endless. You just need to know how to utilize these and create a plan. But obviously, the plan doesn't come on day one itself. But the starting point would be find out that one product. So you may be good at, probably, one more important thing that I want to say is, it just came up to my mind suddenly, is viability. The scalability factor of your business idea is extremely important. Now, say you're an artist, you sell hand painted kind of an drawing or painting or whatever. Now, if an investor puts money, what he will want to see is this business scalable? Now, if Harini is manufacturing 100 soaps today, will she be able to manufacture 1 lakh soaps down the line? Now, that's scalability. I'll be able to, cater to the, audience out there for the demand that keeps growing. But if I'm a hand painting artist, if I'm able to make 3 paintings a day, will I be able to make 100 paintings a day? No, I can't. It's just going to be 3 paintings a day, even after 6 years, right? So hence scalability of your business. So when you are building a business plan, you constantly need to keep thinking, how will I scale this? How will I scale this? Today, if I'm making 10, how will I make it to 100? How will I make it to 1,000? How will I make it to 10,000? So that should be the idea. Obviously, when I started making skincare, I was making it with, your kitchen hand blenders. Today, there are emulsification machines that are planted in the factory, which actually churns out 1,000, 5,000 kgs of cream. But what started in the kitchen hand whipping actually landed up there, right? So, you need to be patient. You need to really figure that process out and slowly implement them one at a time.
So good. That was great advice for women who may want to start up. But there's a 17-year-old Himanshu who wants your advice. He's saying, look, I am 17. I have started 2 nonprofits and 1 social startup, which are all non-functional now, currently working on my 4th startup. But his question is that at my age, people admire us a lot, but don't believe in us. And that's a problem I'm dealing with. What would your advice be? Since you have 2
First
sons,
of all, I want to congratulate him for actually doing 3 startups and starting the 4th one. Hats off to Himanshu for that. I think from investors' perspective, Himanshu, investors want I won't say they look for a certain age, but at this age where you are at, you're more experimental. You are an experimental entrepreneur at this point of time, right? You're still experimenting, and for them to have conviction in your idea, you should be well past this stage, right? Obviously, nobody will come and want to put money on your experiments. They would want you to execute your experiments and land up into a viable product or a plan, and that's when the investors come on board. So it's not to do with your age, honestly. Looking at the Shark Tank series recently, there were so many young entrepreneurs who were actually getting a lot of funding from the sharks over there. So I think it's about the experimental stage you are in, and once you know the product and you know what you are creating, I'm sure you'll be able to excite a lot of investors.
So finally, one inspirational question from Raj Purohit, and as we wind up the session today, he wants to know, what are the three biggest lessons of your life?
I think quality, I mean, I'm going to be a little personal here. For me, I think it's quality over quantity is something that I learned, honestly, because I come from a background where I have two kids. My older son has special needs. He has Down syndrome, right? Initially, when I stepped out of the house, I still remember all the kind of guilt that I carried as a mother, leaving my child who is nonverbal, who cannot speak, coming out, spending 8 hours outside the house, not being able to think about, what I am doing. So for me, I trained myself to think quality over quantity is the most important thing in life. So if I'm spending 8 hours in office, even if I'm going to spend 3 quality hours at home with my son, it means a lot. If it's the other way around, if I'm going to spend 8 hours at home and if I'm going to keep thinking about my office, it doesn't make sense, right? So quality over quantity is something that I learned. And even in business, that makes so much sense, because ultimately customers will stay with you if there is quality, right? So instead of making probably tons and tons of products out there, even if you are able to launch two good products in the market which consumers will love, quality over quantity is always a successful mantra. That's the first thing that I've learned. Second thing is, um, I've learned, as a founder, obviously you will not know everything, right? So, for example, me and my dad, between us, I am the product person, right? My dad is the finance person. He handles accounts, finance. Although I come from a commerce background, a number is not my game, right? But what really you need to know is, you need not know everything, but you should be on top of everything, which means that you will need to know at least what's happening, the basic level. That's extremely important. And one of my biggest learning as a founder was, you need to know every function of your business. Even if it's not your cup of tea, you must spend time in learning that zone, because as a founder, as a CEO, you can never say, I don't know what this is in my business. There's no room for it. So that's my second learning. And the third is, I think, culture. That's it's very underrated, but culture is very important when you're building a brand, because whether it's your customer or whether it's your employees, they will actually relate to you, your brand, your company, your ethos, only when you build a strong culture, right? When I call my brand a sustainable brand, and if I am going to be giving all my employees plastic bottled water, encouraging them to probably throw around tons of waste out there, does it make sense? No, right? That means I myself, I'm not building a culture within the organization for people to think what sustainability is. How will they even sell my product out in the market? So building culture is very, very critical. And I think these are my three biggest learnings that I've had in these couple of years.
Quality over quantity, be on top of everything, even if that's not your area of expertise, and the importance of culture. Three great messages to end the session. As the president of TiE Delhi-NCR, Harini, it's been a pleasure to have you with us for such an engaging and energetic session. I'm sure the audience found it that way as well. So for the audience, I just like to tell you that TiE Delhi-NCR does close to 200 diverse events in a year, mentoring programs, many other meets. I would invite you to become an active member. There's so much to be learned, and I've personally grown up a lot learning from others. If you're an established, successful entrepreneur, TiE is the forum to give back. You can mentor others. So that's my parting message. But once again, Harini, thank you for what's been a fantastic session. Look forward to staying with you. More power to you as you build your business and make the world a sustainable place.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. It was an absolute pleasure for me to stay here and share my journey. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Pleasure. All the best.
Thank you.